Now for today's program. Aaron David Miller is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a former State Department Middle East analyst and negotiator in Republican and Democratic administrations. Aaron is a frequent commentator on CNN, MSNBC, NPR, and BBC, and his articles have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Foreign Policy, and Foreign Affairs. Aaron is an advisory board member for Moment's own Moment Institute Middle East Fellows Program. Hanin Ghaddar is the Friedmann Senior Fellow in the Washington Institute for Near East Policy's Linda and Tony Rubin program on Arab politics, where she focuses on Shia politics throughout the Levant. The longtime managing editor of Lebanon's Now News website, Hanin shed light on a broad range of cutting-edge issues, from the evolution of Hezbollah inside Lebanon's fractured political system to Iran's growing influence throughout the Middle East. She is the author of the book Hezbollah-Land. Joining Aaron and Hanin today is Robert Siegel. Robert was the senior host of NPR's award-winning evening news magazine All Things Considered for 30 years. Currently, he hosts Navigating the New Abnormal, a series of web seminars sponsored by American Friends of Rubin Medical Center. Robert is a special contributor to Moment magazine and serves on the advisory board for Moment's Daniel Pearl Investigative Journalism Initiative. Please welcome Aaron David Miller, Hanin Ghaddar, and Robert Siegel.
Suzanne, thank you. Aaron, it's good to talk with you once again. And Hanin, it's good to talk with you for the first time in my case. Welcome. I gave a thought in thinking about this session to summarizing where things stand in the conflict and in the diplomatic attempts to end it. And I realized that if I were to do that and go through events of the past several weeks or a few months, it would consist of me talking for 20 minutes. We'd never hear from you folks. So I've decided simply to punt to Aaron, first of all, to give us, before we focus in on the northern front of Israel, or Hezbollah land, whatever we want to call that area. I'd like you to tell us about, if you were to give a status report on where we do stand in the war and in the efforts to end it, where are we now?
Suzanne, thanks for organizing this, and it's really an honor and always a great pleasure to see Robert and Hanin. Look, I don't know when I concluded this. It may have been March or perhaps April, not long after, Robert, you and I had spoken.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's fair to say that both the headlines and the trend lines of what we see playing out are going to be with us for quite some time. I did not believe that we would be within, several weeks of marking the first year of this war, which may not have been the longest Arab-Israeli conflict. The war of attrition between Egypt and Israel lasted longer, but it is certainly, when it comes to Israelis and Palestinians, the bloodiest, the cruelest, and the most traumatic of their experiences, perhaps with the possible exception of the period from the spring of 1947 until the armistice agreements were concluded in 1949. As far as the headlines are concerned, the Israeli-Hamas war in Gaza, the broad-scale campaign that the Israelis launched during the third week of October of last year has, I think, more or less come to an end. Israelis are no longer doing major ground maneuvers in Gaza, but they are present, operating both to preempt and to respond to what is a residual Hamas presence. Hamas will almost certainly survive this conflict. It may well have lost half of their fighters. I mean, the Palestinian Ministry of Health figures here, which does not distinguish between combatants and non-combatants and combatants. The Israelis judge, I have not seen an American source confirm this, anywhere from 15 to 17,000 Hamas fighters have been killed. But Hamas will survive as an insurgency at a minimum. Prospects on ending or moving this war into a different phase that normal humans could describe as a cessation of hostilities, if only temporary, are increasingly fraught. I would best describe, based on my own experience in Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, is that the Biden administration, since it is in the main taking the lead, and has taken the lead in trying to de-escalate the conflict and ultimately end it. I would describe this as a negotiator's cul-de-sac. A negotiator's cul-de-sac with no easy or quick way out. All of the issues, from Nitzerim corridor to the Philadelphia corridor, to the numbers of live and dead hostages that will be exchanged in asymmetrical trade with larger numbers of Palestinians, some of whom have been convicted and charged with killing Israelis. All of these issues, in my judgment, are tractable. What is missing here, clearly, and we could elevate one issue over another as key or central, is the absence of urgency. Robert, if you and I were negotiating a broken down chain link fence separating our properties, we were each dug in as to what we each wanted out of it. That negotiation would eventually close if you and I had a real sense of urgency. That is to say, the incentives of doing the deal outweigh the disincentives of maintaining the status quo. There is simply an absence of urgency on the part of the two principal decision makers. And there are only two principal decision makers. Yahya Sinwar, ensconced somewhere below Rafah Khan Yunis, meters below ground in a tunnel system that extends half the length of the New York subway system, actually surrounded or proximate to living hostages, has no real interest right now in seeing a deal done unless it's on his terms. Prime Minister of Israel, even if we discounted the fact that his entire world is tethered to an overriding objective, which is to maintain himself in power, really is holding out and holding back for terms and perhaps even a delay that would better serve his interests. Meanwhile, hostages, 97, the Israelis estimate, 64 of whom are probably still alive, are suffering, to say the least. Their families and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza, dislocated, relocated, mostly from northern Gaza. They now reside in central or southern Gaza. One comment, not to tread on Hanin's territory here, but if the Biden administration deserves credit not just for trying, but for actually succeeding, it is in the way they have managed to manage a profound and serious escalation on the northern front.
Right.
And they have played a critical role, as have the Israelis, and risk aversion on the part of Hezbollah and Iran, in keeping that from generating into something the Middle East has never seen before and something we don't ever want to see, which is a regional multi-front war, which would be transformative and incredibly destructive.
Aaron, on that note, I'd like us to turn to Hanin Ghaddar. Welcome once again. And as Aaron, from what Aaron has described, it would be bad enough if we were only talking about fighting in Gaza. It would be bad enough if we were only talking about Gaza and the renewed violence on the West Bank. But then there's this relationship between Israel and Hezbollah. And I would add the third noun in our title, which is Lebanon. I'm a little bit confused what to make of that party. But I wonder, I hear, well, I remember in November of 2023, Hassan Nasrallah saying that this battle was really a Palestinian fight. It was their business. But we've seen, I don't know how many rockets across the Israeli-Lebanese border since. What is the position of Hezbollah on this conflict with Israel?
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Robert and Susan, for having me. And Aaron, always a pleasure to see you. I'm sorry about this depressing atmosphere that we're in today, that everything we're gonna say is not gonna sound very uplifting, but it's what I'm afraid to say, unfortunately, that this war, even if it's over in Gaza, I think what we have seen so far in Gaza, if there was another Israeli objective, to do the same in Lebanon, it will be longer and more brutal. And like what Aaron said about the regional war, it's happening, it's gearing up to that. What I think Hassan Nasrallah, what I'm thinking from, Hezbollah's perspective, the Iranian perspective, is that they don't want this war. Not now, not anytime soon. The Israelis do not want this war, not now, not anytime soon, but they're both walking towards it. It's like we don't want it, but they're moving there. And the reason is that the escalation sometimes it's not in anybody's hand. Hezbollah, you asked me about what Hassan Nasrallah and Hezbollah's position in this war. They need to be part of it. They cannot not be part of it because this war, when this war ends, there will be negotiations, international discussions, some deals made. They want to be part of the deal. They want to have a seat at the table. Hezbollah always wants to have a seat at the table. The Iranians always want to have a seat at the table. So that's why they need to contribute one way or another, but not be completely involved with this war. And that's why we don't see Hezbollah going full blast into this war. When Hezbollah wants to be part of this war, what does that mean? It means that they are going to use all their military assets. The Nukhba of Hezbollah, which is called the Ridwan forces, the precision-guided missiles, the long-range guided missiles that are very destructive. They have a lot, so much that they haven't used. Even with the retaliation that they did 2 weeks ago again for their commander for Shukur and the preemptive strike, they used Katyusha. Katyusha rockets are not precise and they're not strong and they're not long range. They really can't use their assets. That's why we see that Hezbollah hasn't really contributed to the Hamas war. The reason, there are two reasons, I think. The first reason is that these military assets are not to support the Palestinians. These military assets are not there to free Gaza or Jerusalem or anything. These assets are Iran's insurance policy in Lebanon. They will be unleashed when Iran, the regime, or its nuclear program are under direct threat. And this is when these assets are going to be used. Now is not the time for them. And the problem is that if they use them and they lose them, they will be exposed and Iran will be exposed. They are the shield that protects Iran. This is one reason. The other reason, if they use some of these weapons, let's say they want to use like 5 or 10 precision missiles that are very damaging out of the hundreds they have. It is risky. Because even if they use some of them, it means that they have escalated and they've hit Israel hard and they know the response. They know how Israel is going to respond to such an escalation. So they're always playing the game of being part of the game without escalating and provoking Israel to respond. They saw what happened after Majd al-Shams. The response was huge.
Majd al-Shams, we should just say Majd al-Shams is the town on the Golan Heights where one of their rockets hit a school and killed many.
Exactly. Sorry about. I sometimes forget that people don't know what I know. So the response was killing their #1 military commander. That's huge. And this also is a challenge today because they know that they are more exposed than ever. The Israelis very advanced intelligence on Hezbollah, which is much better than what they have on Hamas, actually. That's why they can kill Hezbollah commanders much easier than they can kill Hamas commanders, because most of their advanced intelligence was focused on Lebanon and Iran. That's exactly why they are exposed. So this is something that Hezbollah calculates all the time. The thing is that they are thinking long-term here. The daily responses back and forth are not that important for them. They're focusing on the one achievement, unprecedented achievement that they have done during this war, which is north of Israel. What they have done is they moved in every conflict between Hezbollah and Israel, and I won't say Lebanon because Lebanon wasn't really part of the conflict with Israel. Every war between Hezbollah and Israel, every conflict, every tension, the buffer zone or the security zone has always been inside Lebanon. Today, they moved it to Israel. It's still inside Lebanon. South of Lebanon is empty, is destroyed. They have lost all their military infrastructure in south of Litani, but also north of Israel is not doing well. And for them, whether it's true or not, for them, this is a big achievement, and they're not going to let it go. And nothing's going to stop them from imposing that kind of threat on Israel. Part of Israel today is under their threat, and it's not going to stop. They do not want to stop this.
So the fact that a great many Israelis who live in the north near the border have relocated to the south of Israel to be out of harm's way, this is the realization of an interest of Hezbollah.
They talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
Publicly, and even within their small circles, security circles, their commanders talk to the people, the Shia community in their like small villages. This is the main thing that they talk about. Everyone I know in Lebanon, they've heard this so many times. Every time something happens, every time there's a disappointment, there's a failure, there's anything that Hezbollah does that is not satisfactory, they bring this up in order to say, this is not the issue. Remember, the priority, the long-term goal is that we changed Israel in the sense that there's a part of Israel where they don't know what to do, how to deal with, and this is their achievement. The problem is that they know how dangerous this is. They know that Israel is now gearing to the borders of Lebanon and making sure that even if Israel doesn't want that war, but if Hezbollah keeps that threat, something's going to happen. Things are changing in Israel. The military leaders that used to say that we don't want war in Lebanon, this is not the time, they're changing towards more like this is something that we have to deal with. So this is the next real conflict, I think. It's like when Israel is ready for this war and Hezbollah has to do something about the north, I think the real conflict that we haven't really seen is going to be that would be the spark of the bigger one.
First, I should say I'm hearing from you images that I associate with the First World War, sleepwalking into a war, somehow being involved in a conflict that's greater than any party actually wanted it to be. And it's Aaron, you said this is the area where the U.S. can claim some progress in avoiding a huge war throughout the Middle East. What exactly has the U.S. accomplished?
Other than avoidance of a multi-front war, which could involve Israel, Lebanon, pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria striking U.S. forces, the Houthis making their contribution with a capacity, however limited it is, to strike Israel directly with ballistic missiles. And of course, the main event, an Israeli-Iranian conflict. You remember we saw a dress rehearsal April 13, 14. The Iranians launched 350 high-trajectory weapons. 99% of those failed to even get into Israeli airspace. That was a limited strike. It may have been signaled and limited it intentionally. The Israelis responded with a discrete strike, one strike against a radar facility, S-300 in Isfahan. That's not the kind of Israeli-Iranian conflict that could result if Hanin's prescient analysis proves to be true, and you end up with a major escalation between Israel and Hezbollah, goes beyond anything we've seen before, which then, of course, would almost invariably, with two carrier strike groups and nuclear-powered submarine fighter aircraft in the region, would draw the United States in. So we can minimize the importance of conflict avoidance, but I think it's critical. Obviously, the missing piece, Robert, is can, in fact, the United States build on what could conceivably be a confluence of interests between Israel and Hezbollah? Mm-hmm. That's the core question. But I don't think that's possible as long as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in Gaza continues to rage. And I worry that even if Amos Hochstein, talented, able, a glass half full American diplomat, could do a counterpoint to what he did in the last several years, which is to help negotiate a maritime boundary between Israel and Lebanon over precious natural gas reserves. Even if he managed to define a more acceptable line of confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah, which addressed points of Lebanese sovereignty on their side of the border, you still don't have an answer to what Hanin has referred to as Hezbollah's lethal capacity of high trajectory weapons, including hundreds of precision guided munitions, which can be quite deadly and which could cover most of Israel. I don't see how you essentially reach any sort of solution on that. So my annoyingly negative analysis leads me to the following conclusion, that you're going to be faced over time with 3 wars of attrition. One between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, which will continue. A second between Israel and Lebanon at varying levels. And a third between Israel and Iran, which is a unique sort of conflict. And I frankly do not see, in the wake of the traumas to both the Israeli and Palestinian peoples, who are now effectively, in my judgment, leaderless when it comes to even thinking about how to take advantage. You know, Robert, every conflict, every breakthrough in this conflict, with the exception of the Abraham Accords, without exception, was preceded by terror, war, and insurgency. But how to devise a counter to the trauma of October 7 is a Herculean task, and I don't have the answer.
Hanin, I'd like to ask you a couple of basic questions about Hezbollah, and because the one major thing that most of us know about Hezbollah is that it's a Shiite institution, movement, state within a state, whatever we want to call it, and here it is, not being, as you have described, not being a very active ally, but basically aligned with a Sunni religious movement, Hamas. And one of the first things that one of the first simplistic things that people learn about that part of the world is that Sunni and Shia Muslims are antagonists, and this is an antagonism built over more than a millennium. What is Hezbollah all about? Does it have any interests apart from those of Iran? Does it control Lebanon? And is it how does it manage to support this rather large movement that it is?
Well, basic questions, but I can talk forever about these, but I've tried to be concise as much as possible. On the first part is the relationship. Let's talk about the relationship between Hezbollah and Iran. I was in the south of Lebanon when the whole thing started, and I remember actually, like on the personal level, I remember the shifts within Hezbollah and the Shia community. And you see, it's when Hezbollah started, it wasn't Hezbollah decided to start a group, right? There was IRGC members who came to Lebanon right after the Islamic Revolution in Iran.
These are the Iranian Revolutionary Guards.
The Iranian Revolutionary Guards came from Iran right after the Islamic Revolution in 79. And that same year, they came to Lebanon, which means that one of the core principles of the Islamic Revolution in Iran is spreading the revolution. And they first looked at Lebanon as a good potential, not Iraq, because of the political situation. Lebanon was very vulnerable in the 70s because of the civil war that was taking place. It's close to Israel, so the Shia are at the borders of Israel. So it made sense to them to spread the Islamic revolution within the Shia community in Lebanon. And Hezbollah started officially as an organization in 82, but there has been like years before. And throughout the years, it has become very evident to me, and with a lot of circumstantial evidence and statement by Nasrallah himself saying it actually, and sometimes you have to believe him when he says that much. Hezbollah and Iran's relationship is much more organic than what Iran has with their other proxies or clients or allies in the region. The Yemenis, the Hamas, the Sunnis or non-Sunnis.
The Iraqi militias.
The Iraqi militias, the Syrian militias, the Yemenis, you name it. They're all clients or allies or proxies, right? So it depends on each group. Hezbollah is not a proxy in that sense. Hezbollah, and they actually say it. When you ask them, when you talk to them, and they see it, they work with the Iranians that way. It's much more organic. They are part of the Quds Force. They are a big part, major part, a big, high rank part of the Quds Force. And the Quds Force is the regional arm of the IRGC. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
The Revolutionary Guards.
Yeah, so they are actually part of the Quds Force. They're not outside, they're not clients. It's not like they get orders from Iran and they implement. They are part of the decision process, in the sense that on Lebanon and internal Lebanese politics and alliances and elections and presidential file, they have the right to make these decisions because it's part of their job to make these decisions. On the bigger war and peace decisions, regional security, Lebanon-Israel wars, Syria, etc., where they are present, they need to consult with, like it's part of the decision process within the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. So they are part of this process. This thing is an institution. It is a one-man show in the sense that the Wali al-Faqih al-Murshid Ali Khamenei is the head of the system, but it is a system where the decisions are taken, like Hezbollah has its own leverage within the system. It's not the decision maker, but it's part of the Iranian system. I'm saying it's Iranian in the sense that, yes, they are Lebanese. They're not Iranians. They're definitely Lebanese with Lebanese passports, speak Lebanese accent. However, in Lebanon, we say we are occupied by the Iranians via Hezbollah, in the sense that Hezbollah always puts Iranians' interest first, not Lebanese interests, and that's all that matters. If you put another country's interest first, this is where your allegiance is, right? So this is how it is, and their decisions actually are always in Iran's interest. That's why today they are keeping their assets as Iran's insurance policy. Their relationship with Iran is much more organic than other proxies. And after, there's a phase for Hezbollah before Soleimani. Soleimani was the previous commander of the Quds Force who was killed in Baghdad in 2020. This guy changed Hezbollah also. Yeah. They've always been part of the system, but Qasem Soleimani gave Hezbollah a new mission. Their mission is to be Iran's regional right arm. They need to be Iran, like they are the ones who are training and providing logistical support for all the proxies in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. The Houthis benefited a lot from Hezbollah's missile technology and training. They have been Iran's regional asset, basically. That's why we haven't seen since 2006 a lot of tension on the south of Lebanon with Israel. Their main focus was on Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, etc. Their mission has also changed in recent years.
Let me put this question to both of you, because it was very striking to me, and that is the Israelis managed to kill Ismail Haniyeh, the so-called political leader of Hamas. He was living in Qatar, but they actually assassinated him with a bomb that, as I understand it, had been planted in the Revolutionary Guard's guest house sometime before Haniyeh's visit there. That sounds, Aaron, I can ask you first, that sounds like a degree of Israeli penetration of a very powerful Iranian institution that would make me, if I were an Iranian, extremely suspicious of everyone around me and very concerned about Israeli intelligence penetration of my defenses.
I think that was part of the reason that the Israelis have a list, as they did after Munich in 1972.
The Olympics massacre.
Golda Meir created the Committee X, which mandated the elimination of Black September operatives, which was an arm of Fatah, who planned and helped organize the Munich killings. And the Israelis went about, it took them years to get the principal architect, Ali Hassan Salameh, but they ultimately did, and the Israelis have a list, I'm sure, in the wake of October 7th. But in terms of Iran, I think that was a message, just as the precision-guided strike on April 19th against the one S-300 radar site in Isfahan. We can hit you anywhere at any time. I also think in the wake of October 7th that the IDF and the political establishment have an added incentive to demonstrate Israeli competency and credibility, given the cosmic intelligence failure on the part of Israel pre-October 7th, and given the galactic inability, apparently, to respond in those first 24 hours to Hamas's penetration of the border.
Right.
I think that was the added incentive. But I think Hanin makes a great point. The killing of Fuad Shukr, of a very close confidant of Hanan Nasrallah, the Israelis have been looking for Sinwar, and we have been trying to help them find him. They've killed Mohammed Deif. They've killed Marwan Issa, the deputy commander. They killed Salah Harouri in Beirut in January. But they simply cannot apparently find Sinwar. Again,
the actual military.
You can separate yourself from the premise of killing and this innocence on both sides. It was an extraordinarily impressive operation, both in Beirut and in Tehran.
Hanin, as you say, this is worrying to Hezbollah, and I assume to Iran as well.
Definitely, and I think this is the deterrence factor of all this. This is how Israel. I think Israel's intelligence is the most deterring factor against Iran and Hezbollah's escalation. Sorry, you had a different question, or do you want me to comment?
No. I wanted to hear what you had to say about that.
Yeah, the assassinations. Let me just point out that, just to give you an idea of Hezbollah's dilemma today, is that in 2006, the last conflict with Israel, which was not this, it was an actual war, real war. The number of Hezbollah commanders and fighters killed were less than today. Today, Israel has managed to kill around 400 fighters and commanders. A lot of them were assassinations, targeted assassinations. Some of them were south of Litani and launchers in the south.
South of the Litani River is really the area just immediately north of Israel. At the border. So some of them were killed, and about most of these are assassinations, are direct hits. And this tells you how Israel's intelligence in Lebanon has advanced and shifted since 2006. And the impressive part is that Lebanon, we always thought that Lebanon cannot be a Syria scenario. Syria scenario in the sense that before this war, Israel was hitting Syria, Iranian and Hezbollah assets in Syria without causing civilian damage, because it was more in vast lands, non-residential areas. And we thought that it works in Syria, and Lebanon, it cannot work because Hezbollah is Lebanon is smaller and more condensed, but also Lebanon has always a red line, because Israel thought that if they touch Lebanon, Hezbollah's response is going to be very damaging. These two ideas shattered after October 7, and Hezbollah realized that their narrative of deterrence has been shattered, mainly because of Israel's advanced intelligence. One Syria scenario moves to Lebanon in the sense that they're able to actually conduct targeted assassinations every day, more than once per day, assassinations and hitting actually weapon depots everywhere. It's fascinating. I tell you about my town, which I know very well. I grew up in the south of Lebanon, and my town recently, like every Shia town, Hezbollah has access to it, and they have underground weaponry tunnels, you name it. Earlier this summer, it was hit 3 times, big explosions, weapon explosions, not assassinations. There were more weapon depots. No one was killed, although there were 3 huge explosions in the middle of the town, in residential areas. No civilian was killed.
it's impressive for Hezbollah, it's worrying and concerning, but for the Israelis, it's impressive that for the first time in Lebanon, they can kill and assassinate as many commanders and fighters and targeting the weapon depots without causing many civilian deaths, which is not the case in Gaza. Of course, in Gaza, the civilian death it's unbelievable. In Lebanon, it's a Syria scenario. It's not a Gaza scenario yet.
Yeah.
So it is the shattered, that deterrence, Hezbollah's deterrence, which deterred Israel from attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon, has shattered. So now the deterrence moved to Israel's advantage. And this intelligence and the ability to do targeted attacks without causing too much damage to the country, except north, south of Litani, of course, it's a devastated area. We have, of course, Lebanon, we have also 100,000 Lebanese displaced, internally displaced, which is a big deal for them. But for Hezbollah, it's not as concerning for Israel because no one cares in Lebanon. The government is barely there. So this is very the most important part of Israel's deterrence, I think, is their intelligence. Hezbollah is deterred by this.
I want to pick up on what you just said about the government, because I did promise, if we say Israel, we've talked about Israel a bit, we've talked about Hezbollah a lot. Lebanon, I mean, there still is ostensibly some kind of Lebanese government. It defaulted on its sovereign debt. It has resisted appeals to reform its economy. To say that corruption is rife in Lebanon seems almost it goes without saying. What, Aaron? This obviously is an issue for the United States to deal with Hezbollah as the de facto power in the south of Lebanon, when there's a government that we ostensibly recognize up in Beirut. How has the U.S. handled that problem?
I mean, we deal with the Lebanese government. We deal with Lebanese ministers. We do not deal directly with Hezbollah. I can't speak for clandestine contacts that our intelligence organizations may be making. And, it presents a problem with respect to funding of the Lebanese armed forces, which still, Hanin can speak to this, still represent by and large an institution that the United States would like to support. But the LAF mandate, or even the UNIFIL, UN peacekeepers mandate, have just been renewed this past August for Lebanon. Hezbollah is the most significant political and military actor in the country. And I think in many respects, I think Hamas, after October 7, may well envision that sort of role for itself. Shine away from governance, which was never all that attractive, and trying to replicate, to the extent they can, a Hezbollah model in Gaza. I'm not sure that's going to be possible, but it's a very difficult problem, I think, for the United States, particularly when it comes to U.S. dealings with the sovereign Lebanon.
Yeah. Sorry, you're muted, Robert. We can't hear you.
Excuse me. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
How do you describe the relationship between Hezbollah and the government of Lebanon?
Yeah, I do agree that there is some sort of, I would call them spots within the government that are still independent. And I look at Lebanon as, institutionally, what Hezbollah does actually is fill the void or control the void. When you have a void, when you have a failed or a weak state, Hezbollah either controls it or just lets it happen. Like today, the void is in the presidency. There's no president. We haven't had a president for a long time. But that's a really a strength for Hezbollah and a weakness. The weakness is that they couldn't get their own president. So they do control most of the Lebanese state institutions. But this is an example of how they can be challenged, and the opportunities are there for the Lebanese to challenge them. We have agency. We still have agency. In 2019, the protests, although they didn't lead anywhere because of the arms and the oppression, at the end of the day, it produced a parliament that stripped Hezbollah of the parliamentary majority. And this is big. This is a big achievement of 2019 protests, maybe the only achievement, I would say. It created, the result of the next parliament was Hezbollah was stripped of its majority. This is not a simple thing. This says something about the possibilities and opportunities within Lebanon. The army, yes, of course. The army is an institution that the Lebanese still respect. It's not completely controlled by Hezbollah. Some branches of it are. Some people in it is, because it represents all the Lebanese, including, like Hezbollah. But the problem with the army is not the army itself. The problem is that the army takes its commands and orders from the government and the president. And when you don't have a government that is a sovereign government,
All right.
and the army can't do much. Let's say tomorrow we want to send all these troops to the south of Litani to control the border and make sure that Hezbollah doesn't have any military presence to secure the border. They cannot really do anything there without a government that is sovereign and really means to secure the border. The problem with that is that we all talk about 1701. 1701 has never been implemented only because
this is a resolution we should explain.
Yeah, the United States, the UN Security Council Resolution 1701 ended 2006 war. What it did actually, if it was really implemented in the sense that Hezbollah's military presence, there's no Hezbollah military presence south of Litani, only Lebanese army, etc. If it was really implemented, it would have worked. The problem is that it was not implemented. It was the only part of it that was implemented is that it acted as a ceasefire. And today it will be a ceasefire, but ceasefires are no longer viable after October 7 because the trauma that Aaron talked about of the citizens of the north of Israel is not going to be resolved with 1701. And 1701, everybody talks about it. Everybody forgot 1559, the other resolution that actually strengthens the sovereignty of Lebanon. And you need to look at it as a big picture, not the border. The problem between Hezbollah and Israel, Lebanon and Israel, is not really just like that stretch of border. It's not a border thing. It's a sovereignty thing. If you have a sovereign government with 1559 implemented, which is basically strengthening the Lebanon sovereignty, state sovereignty, then 1701 will be implemented. You cannot think about the border without thinking about the sovereignty in Lebanon.
Let me just ask you two short answer questions, which I should have asked you half an hour ago. First of all, what percent are the Shia of the Lebanese population? And then an 30%. Unrelated. Excuse me?
We haven't had a census since 1932, so I can't really tell you, but I think it would be like 30 to 30%. Yeah.
And you mentioned what the Lebanese army could not do for lack of a president. If there were a president who said, I want to dispatch the Lebanese army to the south of the Litani River to take over control of the area, the border area with Israel, would the Lebanese army be capable of doing that if there were a will of a central government behind them?
Not without 1559 implementation, not without certain aspects of the thought of implementation, not without international resolution to actually implement it and support the Lebanese army. The government alone, without any international resolutions and support, cannot. No, but it can be done. It needs like the political will and long-term vision. Aaron.
Not something in great supply in the region at the moment. Aaron, do you have thoughts on this?
No, I mean, I've been following Lebanon for a while. I mean, it's symptomatic of, I think, a reality that the next administration, previous two administrations, and probably the next two are going to have to confront. You've got at least 5 Arab states in active phases of dysfunction. Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Libya, and Iraq. And no governance, empty spaces, bad governance. extractive leaders who are less interested in the well-being and welfare of their own publics than they are about keeping their seats and their own perks. So this is one of the central questions about this region that is simply beyond Americans' capacity to repair, given I might add, the dysfunction of our own internal house.
Well, you have both made good on your promise to present a pessimistic or let's say a not terribly encouraging view of the situation, but it's been a fascinating description, and I want to hand off to Suzanne right now to see if we have questions from people who've been watching and listening. Suzanne?
Yes, thank you, all three of you, for that very important conversation. Real quick, somebody wanted to know, are there Lebanese Christians still living in Lebanon, and how do they feel about Hezbollah?
Yes, there are still a lot of Lebanese Christians living in Lebanon. It's a very big community. However, I won't say Lebanon support for Hezbollah is not divided in the sense about, like Christians are anti-Hezbollah and Shia are pro-Hezbollah and Sunnis are anti or whatever. This is not the case anymore. Hezbollah is not supported by a sect. So even the Shia itself, like before when Hezbollah started, it has a lot of support. The peak was the year 2000 with the liberation of the South. And things changed drastically afterwards, especially with the demonstrations of 2019 when Hezbollah showed its real face and cracked down on the people to protect the corrupt elite. Changed everything. Today, most of the Shia are the silent majority who are against Hezbollah, but they are afraid, not loyal. That's the huge difference between before. So you think that the Shia support Hezbollah because they're not speaking up or not doing anything. They tried in 2019. Then we saw the protests in the South. They were viciously attacked, and they're afraid, and they're still threatened until today. The Christians are divided. You have the Lebanese forces who are anti-Hezbollah. You have the Free Patriotic Movement, which is the other Christian party that is pro-Hezbollah. They're allies of Hezbollah. The Sunnis with Hariri, they were anti-Hezbollah. Today, Hariri is gone. And now this is something like long study that I'm working on. It will be published before the end of the year. But if you look at how Hezbollah is working with the Sunni community, knowing that their Christian alliance is getting weak, the Sunni today is the new void that Hezbollah is going to fill because the Hariris are gone. The void they are filling is with the Muslim Brotherhood, which now has become Hamas faction in Lebanon. Hamas is growing drastically in Lebanon within the Muslim Brotherhood and within the Sunni community. It's a dangerous trend that is happening. It's not about Shia versus Sunnis versus Christians. I think today with their power, with their guns, with their affiliations with Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood in Lebanon, and I'll have to say that the Muslim Brotherhood's most recent elections in Lebanon, they shifted internally from the Lebanese MBs, Jama'ah, to Hamas. The Muslim Brotherhood in Lebanon now are Hamas faction. So this is something that even if Hamas ends in Gaza, it's not going to end in Lebanon. It will continue on the borders of Israel. And this is happening through the Sunni community. And Christians are the only Christian faction that is actually still outspoken against Hezbollah is the Lebanese forces, Samir Jaja, and they are out there, but they're alone. They're alone in the sense that every opposition, Shia opposition, Christian opposition, it's not enough to be there. It's only going to put them more in danger. And civil war is not an option because they don't have the same weapons. It's just like a narrative.
Do you think that Hezbollah knew in advance about October 7th, and was there any coordination?
That's the big question, right? I don't think they knew all the details, but they knew that there is something happening. Because I look at the circumstantial evidence, right? Before October 7th, that summer, there suddenly Hezbollah escalated on the borders of Israel for no reason. Just some escalations with the tent and with, like some clashes, infiltration, just to distract the Israelis, showing, like there's something might be coming from Lebanon. And this was at the same time with the narrative that was coming out of Hezbollah about the United Front. And then suddenly 1 month or 2 months before October 7, the joint operation room was formed in Lebanon between the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Houthis. So this joint operation room was established in Beirut, in the southern suburbs, the Hezbollah's headquarters, and Hamas through Aruri and Sinwar, like every meeting, I'm sure something came up from this. It was coordinated. I don't think, because they knew about Israeli intelligence, I don't think that they knew all the details. I don't think that they knew about the timing, about the number of people, but something was definitely coordinated. This is my own opinion.
Are there any non-Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon that are worth watching?
Non-Hezbollah leaders? Yeah, you have a lot of Houthi representation. You have Iraqis. You have, of course, like the Hamas leadership in Lebanon. Worth watching. I think they all work under Hezbollah's umbrella. If they're not, like, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood leadership today is very definitely worth watching. The Hamas leadership today in Lebanon is worth watching, but they don't have the relation. They don't have the decision making or the agency to do anything without Hezbollah's consent.
David, is there anybody you think is worth watching?
In Lebanon?
Yes.
I mean, Hanin I'll be interested in looking at her study when it comes out. The Hamas connection, I think, is important. It just seems to me that in a country where the country's been dealt a very bad hand geographically and even demographically, Hezbollah has managed to more or less corner the market in terms of security and weapons, and it has the most successful external patrons of any of the sects within the country. So I defer to Hanin here. I think Hezbollah, for the time being, has essentially created a monopoly on leaders, and I doubt if any Lebanese faction or individual has the capacity without a lot of support externally. That might not even be enough to challenge Nasrallah.
Is the reason that they can't find Sinwar, is there a possibility they just can't find him, or is he surrounding himself by the hostages?
Well, to answer the second question first. I mean, the tragedy of what occurred over the last three or 4 days, we don't know how close the Israelis were to actually freeing the 6 in Rafah. There may be a backstory on here that the Israelis want to reveal, but clearly Hezbollah has issued, they said as much. They've issued quote unquote instructions that on the approach of the IDF, I mean, they haven't explicitly said what the reaction would be, but I think we know what it is. It was a willful execution, and Hezbollah has warned that additional Israeli operations in close proximity of hostages would lead to the same result. I think Hamas went dark pre-October 7. How Sinwar is communicating with the external leadership, which makes this negotiation unbelievably complex and complicated. It's clearly by courier. The Israelis have discovered sophisticated communications facilities in these tunnel structures, but signals intelligence, which the Israelis have the capacity to monitor. And again, I'll say it again, we've said this publicly, the administration has said it publicly, that they're assisting the Israelis in every way they can in an effort to locate Sinwar. I just think the extent of the tunnel system, the depth of it, the complexity of it, combined with a smart non-communications policy on the part of Hamas, has essentially, I mean, it's hard to imagine 11 months in. Gaza is what, 363 square kilometers? It's twice the size of the District of Columbia, but an entirely subterranean structure exists. And Hamas has traded tunnels, and they've traded on time in an effort to more than hold their own against the Middle East's most formidable and powerful state actor. Maybe the Israelis will get lucky. The impact of killing Sinwar on the fate of the hostages and whatever else is going to transpire is clearly fraught, but the Israelis are looking for him. That's for sure.
Let's see if we can get to a few more quick questions. Is the United States' major goal to help its ally Israel to defeat the enemies who want to destroy it, or is it mainly to prevent a war that it may be drawn into? And if that's the case, what type of true ally is the U.S.?
Well, let me, as someone who worked for 27 years on U.S. Israeli and Arab Israeli issues for Republican and Democratic administrations, that question is loaded to say the least. What kind of ally is the United States for Israel? I mean, I would say that no American official who worked in a Republican and Democratic administration over the course of the more than half century of the U.S.-Israeli relationship, despite the ups and downs, the ticks and the talks, the tensions that have proliferated, the United States is an extraordinary, beyond extraordinary ally. And my concern, frankly, pardon the editorial comment, is that the three elements that, in my judgment, that constitute an ally of the United States, a high coincidence of values, a high coincidence of interests, and a strong base of domestic support. These are the three key elements of what it means, aside from treaty obligations, that we don't have a formal defense or security treaty with the state of Israel. Those are the three elements of what constitutes an ally. Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Britain, France, Germany. These are allies of the United States. My concern, frankly, and it's an editorial comment, is that all three of these elements, high coincidence of value affinity, high coincidence of interest, and a strong, sustainable basis of domestic support, these are all under stress, not just as a consequence of Israeli action, but also as a consequence of the fundamental reality that Israel has become, like so many other topics in this argued culture in which we live, it's become a partisan issue. And that, for anyone, including myself, who values a strong U.S.-Israeli relationship, is a terrible development.
And lastly, as you stated earlier, David, you had little prospect of a negotiated settlement anytime soon. Are we slipping into, or are we already in what seems to be a forever war?
I mean, as I mentioned, I think that Gaza in some form we will be dealing with this issue between now and the end of the year. I still believe there is a chance for a phase one agreement. That would be a limited exchange of hostages for a large number, asymmetrical number of Palestinian prisoners, and a 6-week ceasefire. If you could get that, and I'm not entirely sure we can, but I think there is the possibility of getting that. I do not see this conflict in Gaza ending as a consequence of a diplomatic negotiation. So I think an unsettled, insecure, not prosperous, highly fraught Gaza is likely the trend line going forward. And as Hanin has mentioned, I see no comprehensive or definitive fix to the strategic problem that Israel faces with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the Israeli-Iranian relationship is the third sort of war of attrition that's going to continue. I wish I had happier news to report, but I would be willfully and intentionally misleading you, and I really wouldn't want to do that.
And Hanin, I'll give you the last word. Any last thoughts on this or anything else?
I definitely agree with David. It's not going to. It's as I said at the very beginning, let me just conclude with the first thing I said, which is nobody wants this big war, and nobody wants to go for the regional war in Lebanon and Iran. Maybe, you know, like we're not talking about the Iraq and the Syria front. We haven't talked about what's happening inside Jordan today, which is hugely risky. So it's nobody wants that, but the way things are happening and the way diplomacy is fading. That's why we're all walking towards that without us really wanting to do it. Nobody wants that big war, but diplomacy is fading. And the reason, it's not because the diplomats are bad, the diplomats are good. And diplomacy is fading because, Aaron said it at the beginning, you know, like Sinwar is thinking about himself, Bibi is thinking about himself, the countries and the people's interests are coming next, I think, and I think that's why we see diplomacy fading. And in Lebanon, diplomacy has failed, and Haksin said that he's not going to return to Lebanon before ceasefire in Gaza, because simply Hassan Nasrallah said that he is not going to negotiate anything before a ceasefire in Gaza. So how can the diplomats work when the people in the battle do not want to stop it, but do not want to escalate? That doesn't work. If you don't want to escalate, you gotta like start talking. But then if you refuse to talk, this is going to escalate. So I unfortunately think that this is where we're going, when people's interests come first rather than the country's interests. It's sad, but yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, Hanin, Aaron, Robert, we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Thank you to the audience for watching.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. I want to remind everybody to go to momentmag.com. This program will be posted later today or early tomorrow morning, where you can share it with others. Also, please sign up for our program next week about the current state of Black-Jewish relations. Thank you again to everybody, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Suzanne, Robert, and
Thank
Hanin.
you. Thank you very much. Great to see you all. Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.